All right, so you want to talk about critical free agents as well.
The ones to re-sign. So that's like the first part of this, right, is cut candidates, get rid of who the guys are going to get cut to make way for the spending, to make way for the kind of balance the credit card stuff that the New Orleans Saints always do, right? They've already started their moves. They converted a bonus of, I forget who it was, but some random player for $5 million. Marcus May. They converted a Marcus May salary to a bonus to free up $5 million worth of cap space, right? This is what the next couple of weeks is going to be about, is moving money around, freeing it up, paying off the credit card, cutting guys so that you can actually sign people. And then the first part is, or part of that is cutting people. Part of that is also re-signing your own guys, because number one, you want to make sure they don't hit free agency. Number two, that can actually create salary cap space as well because of the way those contracts get done. You can push out the money to multiple years and end up with a better salary cap situation, ironically, by signing a guy than by potentially getting rid of them. So who are the guys that need to be re-signed?
So we got, I see a list here. We'll work off the list. Okoronkwo. Mm-hmm. I love it for Houston.
Yeah.
My only criticism is that they didn't sign him to a longer deal originally.
Yeah,
that he's back to free agency.
I don't know that that's necessarily a mistake. Like, we really liked that signing at the time, and I think he kind of underwhelmed relative to what we would have expected him to do this season. But he flashed enough that I think you probably want to bring him back and, see if he can be better long term. But because he only flashed and relatively underachieved, I think they can probably do that quite reasonably, deal-wise. Like, I think my point being, I think he's probably cheaper to sign to a multi-year deal this year than he would have been a season ago. So therefore, it's good business.
I mean, it was an easy contract this year. 1 year, $3.25 million. I think if you get him for something close to that, that's a steal every year.
Yeah.
That's why if you sign up for that 1 year,
but don't you
feel
think,
like you could have gotten him in a similar range for multiple years. But either way, he's coming off a career year, and D'Amico Ryans in Houston. Every time a new coach goes in to a place where when they used to have a great defensive line, you assume they're going to try to build it up. Okoronkwo is not like a number one pass rusher or anything like that, but if he's your second or third pass rusher, third in particular, move guy that you can create mismatches, I love that. So I think keeping him in the building would make a ton of sense.
Yeah, I think so. I think he's a guy that they should be, this season for them, we were talking about, like, who are pieces going forward. And I think he showed enough that you would want to try and keep him around.
Who else you got here?
Jakobi Meyers.
Really?
Yeah. Okay, number one, he's probably the best wide receiver available in free agency should he make it that far. But he's also the best receiver the Patriots have had for the last several years. And without him, they get markedly worse. Now, yes, they can draft receivers. Yes, they can try and target, but they can't target a free agent that's better than him because he's the best free agent receiver available. They can target one via trade, which they've done several times before. Sure, maybe that's the route they go. And if they want to dive into the draft, they have one of the worst records of drafting receivers in NFL history. So Jakobi Meyers is probably quite high in your list of options for receiver.
My concern is when I go to the PFF free agent list over at PFF.com, not only it's not a concern that Jakobi Meyers is number 7 on the entire list and the top wide receiver. That's not the concern, that he's good and gets open. And from a PFF WAR standpoint, top 30 most valuable receiver over the last few years. My concern is the projected contract coming from our guy Brad. 4 years, $16 million per year. If he's up in that range, do you want to pay Jakobi Meyers that kind of money? I still think he's a good 2, right? Mm-hmm. Michael Gallup-esque, number 2, different style maybe a little bit than Gallup, gets open, all that stuff. He's a good, solid receiver. Do you want to pay good and solid $16 million? The guys that have made that in the last couple of years are Michael Gallup, Corey Davis. Is Meyers worth that kind of money?
Do you want to? No. Should you? Maybe. Look, Mike Williams signed for $20 million a year last season, right? I think we're getting to the stage now where $16 million a year for your second receiving option is actually not a bad amount of resources to dedicate to that if they show up consistently and they keep making plays. The problem is it still leaves you as the Patriots needing to find the number 1 from somewhere. And that's going to probably be expensive because, again, they're not going to go and do it in the draft, right? Because they stink at that. So they're going to try and trade something maybe maybe they're in the DeAndre Hopkins sweepstakes and then you're into serious money. But
do you think teams really? So we're gonna have Rick Spielman on the show this Friday. Fire in some questions for Rick Spielman.
Former NFL general manager.
Former general manager. He sat in the seat for what, 15, 16 years
yeah.
with the Minnesota Vikings. So we have a lot. We had him on the show previously when you were out on your road trip. I had him on the show. People love the discussion. You and I will both be talking to Rick on Friday. We've got some questions, but I want to hear other people's questions. Maybe one of them I want to ask is, when you're sitting in that seat and you're saying, we have a need at this position, do you sit there and evaluate yourself and say, we're bad at drafting this?
Yeah.
Like, do you think the Patriots actually sit there in the meetings and like, we're not drafting a receiver, we're not good at this?
I think the longer the evidence mounts, the more that has to become a thing. Like, if you swing once or twice and miss, you probably don't go, well, we just stink at this, let's not ever do that again. You have to keep going. But if you've failed for so many years and then you finally tempt yourself back into the first round because you saw something in N'Keal Harry, and then N'Keal Harry becomes one of the worst draft picks in the last 10 years, come on. At some point, we have to face reality here, right? And say, let's just not do that again.
What was the Vikings' blind spot from a drafting standpoint during his time? Was there one? Because you could say, hey, they had a bad offensive line for a few years. But
edge rusher, I guess. Edge rusher, if you sort of...
No, because they got maybe early round ones.
No, so they hit on Donnell Hunter, but then seemed to sort of say, well, we can just do that every time. And then kept drafting fourth-round edge rushers that were terrible.
And Everson. Did they draft Griffin, right? Everson Griffin.
Was that pre or post? Might have been. I don't know if that was before Spielman.
They missed on Jared Allen compliments and everything, right? Through the years.
Oh, institutionally, the Vikings generally have had real problems finding edge rushers dating back way before Spielman. That's why they traded for Jared Allen, because Erasmus James, Kelechi Udeze, they drafted these guys in the first round, and all of them were bad. So they finally went, you know what, to hell with this. We're trading 2 first-round picks for a dude we know is a superstar.
All right, so that'll be interesting to ask Rick. So the Patriots potentially re-signing Jakobi Meyers. I could see it. I understand. I know the cap's going up, and that's the other theme we're going to have this offseason. Okay, cap's going up, and free agents aren't great, so we're going to see some big...
Griffin as well was Spielman, so they found 2 of those guys in the mid-rounds and then kept trying.
Either way, let's ask that let's add that to our list on Friday. Do you ever look at your self-evaluation at a position and say, hey, we're not good at this, and let that affect things? What other free agents do you have on your list here? I got one that Brad cited I thought was interesting.
Jermaine Eluemunor, offensive tackle for the Las Vegas Raiders. So when you looked at that line on paper before the season, you're like, this is a train wreck. This is going to go bad. And it did at the start. It was terrible. And then the line kind of came together, and they actually were playing pretty well by the end of the season. And Eluemunor is a guy who actually has quite a good overall body of work in the NFL. Obviously, he was with the Patriots beforehand, and now once he got a starting gig for the Raiders, I think he's actually a solid starting tackle.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, at worst, he's going to be a swing tackle, right? And then you figure out what you want to pay that. He's been a swing tackle the majority of his career. But, yeah, very good season for him. I find it interesting that Brad, the premise of the article is free agent a team can't afford to lose. Doesn't mean you're going all out to get this guy, right. But it's like if you don't, it's just another hole that you have to fill. Mm-hmm. But the Saints and Marcus Davenport, he has on the list here. We've talked about Davenport a little bit. He's one of the top free agents. He has unbelievable snap-to-snap production, but hasn't played a ton. We talked about his snap totals on the show here a couple weeks ago. Do you take another shot on Davenport, right? It's like when you get the developmental player and he really hasn't developed by year 4 or 5, do you still try to invest in him? Because Davenport is like this close to being a top 8 to 10 edge defender if he stays healthy.
Just jumping back to Eluemunor for a second. I think the Raiders had their bye week quite early. I think it might have been week 6. Either there was a missed game in there somewhere. Since that week 6 point, Eluemunor was a top 10 graded tackle. He had an overall PFF grade of 82.3, 79.4 as a run blocker, 81.4 as a pass blocker, gave up 1 sack from that point on. half the total penalties he had this season were before that point. We were in the first 5 weeks of the season. He played really well once you got over that like early part of the season where almost the entirety of the Raiders line stank.
He's the only one that had some scheme history there too.
Yeah.
Played for Josh McDaniels
Right.
in New England and everything.
And this was also, by the way, like by far the most starting experience he'd had in the NFL. Like he had 400 snaps with the Patriots that 1 year. He had a couple of hundred this last season with the Raiders, and then 940. This is like almost 50% of his entire career snaps at this point. But I think he kind of showed that like that guy can start and be good for you.